The alarms hadn't even finished cycling through the command centers when the first assessments came back. Over 300 drones and missiles, all airborne within the same compressed window, all converging on Israel in the kind of coordinated, multi-vector salvo that regional militaries had war-gamed for years but never actually watched unfold in real time. This was Iran's biggest swing, the largest direct attack of its kind the region had ever recorded, and it landed with almost nothing to show for it. The overwhelming majority of that barrage never reached a target. A layered shield built from American, Israeli, Jordanian, and Allied systems picked the salvo apart in the air, and what should have been a demonstration of Iranian deterrence turned, in the space of a few hours, into a demonstration of its limits. I keep coming back to that night because it's the moment that tells you everything about where Iran actually stands right now. Not the headlines about a single strike or a single interception, but the pattern underneath them. I'm Ryan. I flew the F-15E in combat, flew the F-16 with the Thunderbirds, and now I fly the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A220 for a living. Reading threat pictures and understanding what militaries do when they commit to a strategy. That's been the through line of my whole career. So let's rewind from that night of the failed salvo and trace how Iran actually got there. Because the story isn't one event. It's the slow, compounding collapse of a 40-year strategic model. And I think once you see it laid end to end, you'll understand why Tehran's options have narrowed to almost nothing. Before I go further, a note on sourcing. Some of what follows is confirmed and documented. Some of it is assessment, drawn from credible reporting and patterns of behavior that deserve healthy skepticism rather than blind acceptance. I'll try to keep that distinction clear as we go, because you deserve that. For 4 decades, Iran ran the same playbook. Fund proxies, keep your own hands clean, and let Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shia militias across Iraq and Syria absorb the risk while Tehran absorbed the benefit. It was strategic depth by outsourcing, and it worked for a remarkably long time. What's happening now is that the entire structure is coming apart, not from one dramatic blow, but from pressure applied simultaneously across every pillar that held it up. The proxies, the economy, the air defenses, and the diplomatic cover. Losing all 4 at once is a category of crisis Iran has never faced. Start with Hezbollah, because what happened there is almost without precedent in modern irregular warfare. Its senior leadership, cultivated over decades, was eliminated in a string of precision strikes that stunned military analysts everywhere. The compromise of Hezbollah's communications network, the pager and radio detonations, exposed an intelligence and security failure so severe that the organization lost its most capable, most battle-tested commanders in a compressed window with essentially no time to adapt. Hezbollah isn't gone. Organizations like that rebuild. But rebuilding takes years, and in the meantime, the deterrent Iran held over Israel through Hezbollah has effectively been broken. The Houthis tell a different but related story. They've absorbed months of sustained American and Allied airstrikes against their missile sites, radar installations, command nodes, and logistics chains, and they're still fighting. I don't want to undersell that resilience, it's real. But their ability to hold the Red Sea hostage and threaten global shipping at scale has been significantly degraded, and the political cost of their continued attacks has landed almost entirely on Iran rather than on the Houthis themselves. The Iran-backed militias scattered across Iraq and Syria have faced the same erosion. Every time they've struck American troops or assets, American forces have struck back, and Tehran's old assumption that Washington wouldn't escalate past a certain point has been repeatedly disproven. Worse for Iran, the retaliation now comes with explicit public statements tying the strikes directly to Iranian funding and direction. The deniability that used to shield Tehran is being stripped away, one strike at a time. Now overlay the military posture. 2 carrier strike groups operating in the region at once isn't unheard of. Deployments get scheduled well in advance, and dual carrier presence has happened before. So I want to be fair about that. But the timing, the messaging out of Central Command, and the sheer density of hardware involved send a message anyway. Each strike group isn't just a carrier, it's a cruiser, a screen of destroyers, submarines, and a logistics tail that can sustain combat operations for a long stretch. Two of them stacked in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea create an air power umbrella that Iran's defense network was never built to handle. I've flown missions where you could feel the numbers were against the other side, and it changes everything about how that side thinks and what risks it's willing to take. Iran's own air force is still largely built around aircraft from the 1970s, kept flying on cannibalized parts since the supply chain dried up after the revolution. Russian and Chinese systems have filled some gaps, but the integration and training aren't at a level that makes this a close fight in the air. Which is exactly why that April salvo mattered so much. Iran built its missile and drone arsenal specifically because it can't compete in the sky, and it bet everything on that arsenal in one massive coordinated launch. When the layered defense swallowed nearly all of it, the operational result was close to zero, and that failure exposed the ceiling of Iran's primary deterrent in front of the whole world. Since then, the shield has only gotten thicker. Terminal high-altitude area defense batteries in place, Patriot batteries positioned, naval fire control systems networked across the destroyers. Whatever gap existed that night has narrowed further since. Then there's the precision strike question, and this is where American capability is genuinely hard to overstate. Guided bomb kits like the Joint Direct Attack Munition, especially the extended range variant, let aircraft release from distances and altitudes that make short-range Iranian air defenses close to irrelevant. You don't need to fly into the threat ring if the weapon can cross it for you. Add the newer generation of ground-launched precision strike missiles and add the B-2 stealth bomber, capable of penetrating defended airspace and dropping the massive ordnance penetrator on hardened, buried targets. Exactly the kind of targets Iran has spent years digging its nuclear and military infrastructure under to protect. I want to be careful here. Using any of that against Iran directly would be an enormous escalation, and I'm not suggesting it's coming or that it should. What I'm saying is that Iran's leadership can look at this picture and know, with real clarity, that their old assumptions about what they could absorb or deter no longer hold. That loss of confidence is itself a form of pressure, maybe the most corrosive kind. Layer the economy on top of that, and the picture gets existential in a way missiles alone never could. Sanctions have squeezed Iran's oil exports, the financial backbone of everything from the military to the proxy payments to domestic patronage, down to a fraction of what they were before maximum pressure returned in full force. Iran has found workarounds, discounted sales to China chief among them, and enforcement is never airtight. I want to be fair about that too. But inflation has been brutal, the currency has collapsed against the dollar, and ordinary Iranians are absorbing the damage in ways that generate real domestic political heat. Sanctions have also choked off Iran's access to the dual-use components its missile and drone programs depend on, forcing Tehran into front companies and third-country routing that cost time, money, and precision. And the financial isolation, restrictions on correspondent banking, on moving money through the international system, has made funding Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Iraqi militias slower and more expensive than it used to be. None of it stops entirely. Cash and informal networks still move, but the efficiency Tehran once relied on is gone. Diplomatically, Iran is more alone than it looks. Russia is consumed by its own war. China is managing its own frictions with the West. Neither can offer the kind of active cover that would meaningfully shift the pressure equation. Meanwhile, the Abraham Accords reshaped the regional map in a way Tehran didn't see coming and can't undo. Normalized ties between Israel and Gulf Arab states, a cautious but real thaw between Saudi Arabia and Israel. None of it perfect, all of it structurally unfavorable to Iranian influence. Add to that the protest movements that have periodically shaken the regime from within, most recently the wave that followed the death of Mahsa Amini, and you get a leadership managing a legitimacy crisis at home at the exact moment it's trying to manage a strategic crisis abroad. I don't think that's a coincidence anyone in Tehran is comfortable with. So what does Iran actually do from here? Direct escalation against the United States or Israel carries the kind of asymmetric risk that a failed attack doesn't just cost militarily, It costs politically by exposing exactly how limited the deterrent really is. Staying the course, propping up what's left of the proxies, issuing threats, playing for time, buys nothing but slower bleeding. Every month of sanctions is another month of economic decay. Every month of proxy attrition is another month of lost depth. Which leaves negotiation. Coming to the table on the nuclear program, the proxy network, regional behavior, in exchange for relief. It's not surrender in any dramatic sense, but it is a real concession of the posture Iran has held for 40 years. And I think that's precisely the outcome this entire pressure campaign has been engineered to produce. I don't want to oversimplify this. The Iranian regime isn't irrational, and it has weathered pressure that would have toppled other governments. Its leadership has survived wars, sanctions, and internal unrest for decades, and nobody should expect a quick or easy capitulation. But there's a human layer to this I think about often, having sat in briefing rooms myself where the threat picture made your stomach tighten. Somewhere right now there are Iranian pilots strapping into aircraft built before they were born, running through checklists on airframes held together with cannibalized parts, fully aware of exactly what's arrayed against them in the sky. They'll fly anyway because people defend their homes regardless of the odds, but that awareness shapes what their commanders are willing to risk, and it shapes the debates happening inside the regime right now about whether the current posture can hold. Behind every one of those cockpits, every missile crew, every patrol boat, there are families waiting at home. On every side of this. That's the part that should never get lost in the strategic language, and it's worth sitting with before deciding how any of this should end. Underneath all of it sits the nuclear question, the one that complicates everything else. The precise state of Iran's enrichment program is assessed rather than confirmed. Intelligence agencies have gotten these programs wrong in both directions before, so I'd hold that loosely. But the consensus among serious analysts is that Iran is closer to threshold capability than it has ever been, and that timeline is almost certainly shaping the pace of everything described above. Both Washington and Israel have made clear the military option against those nuclear sites remains on the table, and the B-2 with the massive ordnance penetrator exists specifically to hold buried, hardened targets at risk. Whether it would work against everything Iran has dispersed and hardened underground is a genuine, unresolved debate among people who study this for a living. But the fact that the option exists and that Tehran knows it exists is pressure all on its own. None of this means Iran is finished. It isn't collapsing, its regime isn't about to fall, and anyone selling you a clean, simple ending isn't being straight with you. What has changed is that the strategic architecture Iran relied on for 40 years, resilient proxies, a missile deterrent nobody could intercept, economic staying power, diplomatic cover from Moscow and Beijing, is gone, replaced by a position of vulnerability with no obvious way out. Whether Tehran's leadership eventually decides that holding the current line costs more than a negotiated accommodation is the real question. And history says that kind of decision comes slowly, only after every other door has quietly shut. I think we're watching the early stage of that shift happen right now, not the end of the story, the start of it. And it's worth asking yourself, if you were the one making that call in Tehran, whether you'd bet on holding out or on getting to the table first. Because I'm honestly not sure there's an easy answer to that one.